Northern Road Link presentation talking about the selection of the preferred corridor, the process of that. And I hope you find it interesting. We're here till 8 o'clock. We're going to take questions. If you want to have some lengthy discussions, we can sit down in roundtable format and have those discussions as well too. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But before we do that, I just wanted to do a little health and safety intro here. That in the case of emergency, the exits are at the south and north end, as well as just around through these doors here as well too. So hopefully the snow's cleared over there.
It is.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That's helpful. So so with that, before we go any further, I'd like to call upon Madeline Kioki of Attawapiskat to do the opening prayer.
With that. With that. I would translate, but I was speaking.
And Michael, I'm not sure if you're interested in if you're able to do a project introduction for us, but if you'd like, if you don't mind coming up and doing that for us. I caught you just as you came in, so I thought I'd take advantage of the opportunity.
Teleconference. Thank you, and thank you everybody for showing up, and thank you for being with us. Alan, it's a pleasure. So the Northern Road Link, is a separate, distinct project. There's two other road projects. One is called the Martin Falls project, and really is a community access project. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I didn't realize it was going.
Oh,
Didn't think you were going to get that.
are you translating?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Omagitian matchagati ja kivetten pittiikäis me panik meskano. Käis saagi panekanditi kiapatas venna yvetsi kivitsi shmohtema kakana meskano ge kitiapstano nigante.
Okay, so these two other projects, WSR and Martin Falls Community Access Road, they're in their end stage.
Nishu magani gutagia kampanuan diabetes venna. Ashwina gata kishitawani and magaitabetes chick.
So what makes those other two different? One's actually a community access road. They always wanted that. That's Martin Falls.
Egon ma peiaganditi hi mamuta shikyo ni hios chikichapanik. Egon menamana duino ganduin dakikanik Martin Falls.
And the Webequay Supply Road is what they call an economic development road. It's a standalone remote road going from the airport, Webequay Airport to the proposed lines.
Egon ma guinana miti hi Webequay hios chipanik guinana magiabastana ginti shopakichamano in a kind of taking and we don't talk about taking one. Egon menu take out soon they get taken to the Pentagon and
So what makes the Northern Road Link road different is it's specific for industrial road.
Egon ma gisha pitas now and mana cute and I get the issue and being Mexico. Egon ma how goes to Sagi Saka not sure but I can take it chili pechish Nakishaka meno mescanano, mescanano, if they kishi mette.
And the Northern Road Link environmental assessment, we're in the middle of it.
Ekmagan manosmaiste, give it naktigation and I take a skin to get take a nanos to ship and bano.
So I'm one of the project co-leads.
Kumaga awa wina pea kaniganiskaki and the Menopause.
And there's another co-lead from Martin Falls that works with Martin Falls, his name is Cossum.
Ana maaguttagan di Martin Falls at the ish the Bendagaso Cossum.
Cossum, yeah, awesome, Cossum.
Cossum is in the Gasminana.
Okay, so we just oversee and report to council on the current status of the environmental impact assessment for the.
Ikon hima is a canopa that he gave with the Matsika Kanigan scenes and he cut the bucket and got taken to Batsamuna.
Okay, now I'm going to go through what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk first about the overall method for evaluation of the alternatives. We're going to then talk about the identified corridor options.
Ikon hima gitian Mutako Pega and he got this nugget. Get the Ranovatsagati, you bid Chicanovachagati, Kubanagati, maybe the skip stations, they can him.
Then we're going to talk about factors, criteria, indicators, the things that we use to help figure out the preferred corridor.
Ikon hima is the Gitian Chagati and he gonna get the apathy at the staking is done, he gonna get it.
Then we'll talk about how the evaluation works, weighing and scoring different layers of information. Next, we'll talk about the limits of the process. It's not a perfect process, so we talk about how it is somewhat limited. And we're going to share the results of the evaluation. Well, and we'll show the preferred corridor. And then at the end, we're going to talk about what is going to happen next in the project. So the first slide, there's 7 steps. It's the first part of doing the evaluation of the alternatives. So in this process, we look at the good and bad things about each of the possible road corridors.
And he must go now, economic
Then we take the options that come out of that work and put it into the model to identify the preferred corridor options. So this next slide just talks about looking at the good and bad things about each corridor.
E wani mama e no pasta ke gomeno ke te shina ko ni ni kan te ke ni it she it das it shepagit negati no meskano.
And when we talk about corridor, we don't mean the exact location or position of the road. We're talking about a 2-kilometer wide area, which is like a study area.
Mono ine tapu meskano mwe se han magayana mutta te bugo te hiki tako kanama ebe shepagit negati ke shepagit negati kanama meskano. Nisho askiutte pahigon mashko diskitchen anakaskate goe ane meno ga ane mutta mono ina bumo chigi spestagen am meskano.
So when we identify a preferred corridor, it's an area, and then somewhere in that area, the road will go.
Ego magi kan opachagate ganama pema tamochegewen ego tane we iski shimpane ganama meskano SB kan opachagate go yaskanta tante mo chigi shi tako.
So when we identified the options that we are looking at, there's different combinations of sections of land and water that can be put together to form the road.
Ewan himagi kan opachag nesta shimpane ganama meskano ani bibitus ke wanagi sapanagi tante gi shimpanek tante gi shimpanek nestan hi bibitus hi wana ka bibitus shipaket negati ke chigi sken chigate tante meche ke shipaket negati ke spi ane mamme shipaket negati ke met ke meskano.
So when we go further in the process to identify a preferred corridor, we need to consider inputs, factors, criteria, and indicators.
Tano che non so spiegare che quando sto poco anni che quando che peci e spani che va parte magano che te.
So the process of taking these layers of information, the factors, criteria, and indicators is called multi-criteria analysis.
E come go bugatti a stano che e quando mai riesce a fare kama mo baget negati che dai e che no pacciati e wa patina magano ci abstano che dai tutta gigante che.
So we use computer software to look at these layers of information together. So we're able to look at a lot of information to guide which is the best route.
Ego magia pastaccia che ne tanta quel benegerne a pastana. Ego anhi che a pastaccia che no che tante moice e che scemeno panica nemmeno e pachettene che pescanano.
So next, we're going to talk a little bit about factors, criteria, and indicators. These are the inputs to the model to identify the preferred corridor.
E quando mi chiediamo molto che quando non scatta che abbiamo che ne stanno che quando che non so spiegate che e abbiamo che abbiamo stato ne sta che tutto quando che quando che dopo appena magano tanti che te.
So factors are like general categories. So for example, a factor would be biological environment.
Magari ma oscaccia nemmeno cane mutta che che quando che abbiamo che quando na waska kawaskati kaskiti che escono pacciati che quando che abbiamo che abbiamo che mena tutte schiacciati.
So for every factor there are criteria, and the criteria are the things that we study as part of the environmental assessment.
E come che quando che non so che da giocare da quelli che capacità che meno che quando che chi Attiapo ci sta giocando a dice che spenta qualche che con ci e sta qualche ci mamma qualche negativo poi aspetta spana.
So for the criteria, we have indicators. Indicators are a way of measuring each criteria. So that's another layer that we use in our models.
E kutani määrä ei osuuska kun menekin tai tuttakin ei kutani itse panikani kiikuani johtukin pientäkin sikiätti kanopattakin mistä sikiätti te pakin tahtukat ei tuttakin switchi kutsaka niin kiikuani käytti jaksa panikin mistä muu käytti kisten taivakin nigantekin.
I'm now going to call on Angie Brooks to come up and give examples of indicators.
Ja kolmaan kivet viittakan ja bebikin kiikuani tie ja attiavat tanoakin. Kivet se patsomat pietti ei tuttakaan.
Okay, hi there. So one of our indicators is watercourse crossings, in the Attawapscat River.
Aina mä peikä kiepät tanoakin. Anta kaitto figa bitch viittama kanoakin ettaihin. Ei vaan mä peikä tekiä tapasta siipihin että kun kiepät tanoakin.
And one of the ways that we measure that, is for area of water body crossed. And with the Attawapscat, we also use the area of provincial park that's crossed.
Ja kun mä käyn, hän menee kanopattakin kekti, niin ennen kuin kiittää tanoakin tietenkin ei asu tanoakin mä tapasta siipin. Ja kun ne hymän niistä askia kaikki pekattikin tuon kiisiä kanopattakin.
So how we decide which is a preferred corridor is through a weighting and scoring system. We use a weighting and scoring system.
Ja kun mä käyn, animat ettepääpys kuttakin kikona, ja kanopattakin kikona ei ole. Ettepääpys kuttakin teki, ettepääpys taukka.
So for example, we have, 5 indicators or criteria, sorry, and each one of them is weighted 20%.
Ja kun mä käyn heti ja mä just tatsi PF:n hikikona, niissä tänä percent kaittakin, en oo kuulka ja tanan.
And then the scoring, you can see in the red box, we have a different way to score when we get down into the more detailed level.
Ja kun mä käyn PF:n se tispändäkän hikipääsönä, SP avasteenista puhua, sapasi teki tisin temakakin.
Now Don talked about limitations of the model. And the model is only as good as the data that is entered.
Ano mä käyn, mutta kun ikään osuuska kattikin, tipepanuan hiki jääpätystään.
So some of the information we can't use because it either can't be measured mathematically, or it's too complex or it's incomplete.
Että ne kun mun täytyy jääpätystään, eikä täytyy ikään opussa kattiikojas. Näistä puhui täytyy jääpätystään, kun se jäänemä. Näistä puhui eikä täytyy eutsikistään.
So this is just a slide showing the factors and the criteria weighting.
Evanhima kuin umakava pahtina mäkin evanhia noske kun kaikta kantan näistä niin keiti tapatakti käisi kanopassa kätik.
Again, this is just another example. This one is biological environment. You can see that the factor is worth 20%, and all of those things in the list were each worth approximately 5.
E quan me ma gwina go sen ma ge de gwina mi de ke aski ga shpe ma te si ma ka an ma be bit so ne ge kon ati ni be te snatio e quan ma ga a ke ta so ne a sta na ke spiri ke no se ga te no te ke.
And this is an example of what the output of the model looks like visually. This is a heat map.
E ko ma gwino ma ga no se ga te ga no e quan ni pe chi shna go pe chi shi gwen e shna go ke spiri ke no se ga te o ma gwini te ke shi ke te ke ne ga ke quan ni te ke no se wa pa te na ma ko.
So on the heat map, the areas that are more orange are less preferred, and the areas that are darker green are most preferred.
E quan ni ma gwina ga we sa san em hok no ni na ni ta bu te ne ga te ani ma ga ga sho sha sho ga ka te ma ka te o sha sho na go e quan ni e te ke no pa se ga te ke u te ne ga te ke.
This is also an example of the output. These are the actual numerical values of the assessment.
E ko mai no se ga te ke ni na te ke ske te ke na e ko mai wa te na ma ga no ka pe chi shi na go e quan ni a ke ta so ne e a pa te.
Again, this is another example of the results. This is specifically comparison of indigenous land and resource use in the northern section.
E quan ni ma ga wa pa te na ma ke tu ma ke ka ti shi na ke e no se ga te ke ni ski a te tas ka ne su ya ski a ne sta ni a pa te su ne te ke shi a pa te ta no ke.
And in this case, on that slide on the right, you can really see where the darker red is, where it's least preferred, versus the right-hand side where it's more preferred.
Ani ma ka sa me ko na me kwak e quan ni ka me kwak e ga ta bu ga wi shi a pa te ta no ne ma ka u sa na ko ka Chineski te ko te ni te ka wi shi u te ne ga te.
And again, another results slide, which shows all of the corridor options and the list of factors on the left-hand side.
E ko ma ke wa te na ma ke ka ki pe Chineski ka te ke ta so na e wi a pa te ta che ka ni ane a pa te ni te ka shi ma sana te ke.
And again, just as a reminder, the least preferred is the dark red, and then the most preferred is the lighter green.
E quan ma e shi ka no pa te ke ni ka ma o ka shi ma ko e quan ma e ka ta ko e wi u te ne ga te ke. Ani ma ga ke che o sha o ko e u te ni te ke ka shi wi u te na ke ka wi shi a pa sta.
And based on the coloring, you can clearly see that option 3 is scoring better than all of the other options.
E ko mai ka no pa te mano ko e te pi to so ne a ke ta so na ka shi ma sana te ki shi me ane ma ni sto ka te sana te ki ko na ma o cha e ka no pa cha te ki ya pa sta no.
And this is just a blown up version of the preferred crossing of the Attawapskat River.
E ko no mai wa pa te na ma ga no ke te ke ma o ki shi da we cha te ke ban chi shi a pa sta no ka ma a to pa ska ta ke te ki shi a shorte.
And this is a map showing that the colorized version is the location of the preferred corridor.
E wani ma go no mai wa pa te na ma ga no ko an ko sta te shi ta ko ka ma ga wi u te ne ga te.
And just to add that grayed out version is the other corridor options that were not as preferred.
Ano mai ni ga shwa pa te na ko ki ko ni wi na ka ki ka no pa sa ga te ki sa ko ma ga wi na mo na u te ne ga te ani.
And now I'm gonna pass it over to Michelle Nasir.
My name is Michelle Sear, and I work on the Aboriginal and or Treaty Rights and Interests Assessment that is part of the environmental assessment process for the proposed Northern Road Gate project.
Egoin dapat disita teki eneni sketchigen teki gashita kon nekanameno kaki nanati sketchiga teki winamaga egutene ishi maoche ishi atosket ani enen itaskane suen nesta naskumona tepekenta kwasivena teki ishi atoskeo.
So our work on the Aboriginal and or Treaty Rights and Interests assessment relies on Indigenous knowledge, especially Anishinaabe and Indigenous knowledge that we weave through with Western science perspectives. And this is what leads us to work on the Indigenous knowledge program.
Ego mau hope pitus ka shietos keto meno eneno etaskane si viskenchigen ettegi emamo pagitnahigan hiumis kabishiwi ettegi nesagaishi uttenahik emamo nakige uttenivetse pannagan menagato takike yapastatsik etaskane si viskenchigen no.
So our Indigenous knowledge program relies on the existing knowledge base, so that would be existing Anishinaabe Indigenous community information that's available from communities, and we have invited 22 communities to participate in our Indigenous knowledge program.
Ano meno maga itaskane si wenga viskenchigen atuskeven egutene ke kaish tomatic nishitana mamo tashihona jibeje mamo benje neshtuina chiava chestati kaish kiskentaki omeno etteki shipagutana kiskentchigen.
And the other part of our existing knowledge base is information that's available, what we call desktops, and information that's publicly available on communities that can be incorporated as part of our assessment process.
Egutene mau itnahigan hiutibat tepatjamon wawa kagi mamo pagitna kiskentchigen ani magawishi Mattinuitsik mesöönekan kabenchuutsik
So what we're also doing through our Indigenous knowledge program is respectfully requesting the sharing of information from communities that is specific to our project. So whether that means undertaking a traditional land use study or participating in our field programs.
Kagochike mochaka himamu itashi hiwena chibechi bagitina menchiga shigishinna menche chibechi abatista chigota chi wichi kuchika menaga sheta sketchik chi takokanta eniniwi scanning siwi giskenchigon chiash panenega shiabtisichik.
And together, these two knowledge bases, or existing knowledge base and project-specific studies, form what we call our existing conditions or baseline conditions for our project work.
Ego magi mamu pagitinegati kuhugaitakoke eniniwi giskenta muena nestan hemaiti higashi kakishimiska hika tepatsamuna gimautuna hiknestan hiti hiapatisiuna higaki utsapanigi kakinanati kiskenchiketik egutana vechapanigan higikwana kiapatistanoaki iti apatisistratéguma.
So for our Indigenous knowledge program, what we are requesting is that communities share information that's related to their land and resource use, whether it be sharing information on areas of cultural practices and related values and other rights and interests in the project's study areas.
Egumagani ma eutenagigan in itaskani sivigiskenchigan atuskevan enautu tenagigan hevipituskevana gaishi ittakokanti nochmaskamakka yapachistachika enenok chibechubagit nakichiksenchigatini kanti mechi ishittakokani hevitamagiona Kiitiapatestaan wakuma was kawaskahtika askia nanatugiskenchiguna kiishiashitanigatigi.
So what we're sharing here is the timeline of our Indigenous Knowledge Program. We started all the way back in 2022. Before that, in 2021, we also undertook a literature review of Indigenous knowledge information that was readily available.
Kiittikitsestatsik nisho aibeponnek. Japatestaatsikani hikakinaataak skentomoagopaneen nishtana peek aibeponnek. Kakimaamu pakittana moagopaneen. Evanen vuokua omageis pannek magi tentomomenottuskevenno aspenane maha kabeponne kabetsuitta.
At the back of this room, we have boards set up that go through this timeline in further detail. But what I want to say to you here is that this timeline is in line with our overall schedule for the proposed project, as this is a critical information base upon which the environmental assessments are being conducted.
Egumagani takona uittamagi wenantiotana ke ikimasnigati wegenoptapenekan. Nästa kitsikistendaagon omenugo kajatsegumetse tuttaki ksagutse ittagonne kenemenagan ususkaki nauki tuttaki.
So the aim of our Indigenous Knowledge Program is to feed into the overall environmental assessment on the value components that we have identified for the proposed project.
Egumagani mesh mostinchigatik situchigatik animachiabotak itaskani sivikiskenchigen pepitus magani higigonantaki utsapanaki tsmamo pakitnegatiki umetuchigatik atuskeven.
So what we are showing here up here are value components. These are aspects of the land like water, fish, medicines, and berries that are important to communities. And there is a potential they could be impacted by the proposed project.
Evan himanes dishegan optahigan hipepitus kevan antaki goschapaniki keki uttamiskagi makaki mashkojne he awyashashakti he kaishi tajeknesta punne piitti
For the assessment on Aboriginal and or treaty rights and interests, we're looking at two main value components that are up there in purple. These are components that we look at, and they're identified back there on the poster boards as well, where we look at. Sorry, I'm just pausing.
And then you know the he guys what's up on a gig on a type of school nascomet the bed tigers even an installation stand the she Pakistan a potential must not take a new tana the guy.
So the first one is the indigenous use of land and resources value component.
Pushkas maganima the scanner even Itaskani sivinagation, but just Tajika a skinong nesta kaut nakikan here, but the unity out Chipanamaga.
And it refers to information related to sites and areas used for rights-based activities and interests.
The one in man is the good to give baby to share is cannot take you can take you to Panigan and not but take a to check out the beginning situation. Men and take to take a not just check out on.
It also includes information on resources and access to these resources and what they mean to the indigenous communities or groups that utilize them.
The woman is the Chita Bohantaki Guanagishi, Kishakanopus Chagati, Gawishi, Kisketa Guanakanaknis, that did take to Chagatik Jabas Stanwaki.
The other value component that's being assessed under Aboriginal and or treaty rights and interests is cultural continuity and well-being.
The one woman is the extent of the Aboriginal Stanwaki, the scanner is when they get jetty. Sieltä niin käännekin se panee kokonaisesti sieltä minun päätösenä no.
This value component focuses on information related to traditional practices and ways of knowing and being, and connection to land and culturally important sites, areas, and resources.
Ja vanhemmaisiksi kun sen taapuminen kannattiin on sitä tannoke taskane syönnekin tiki. Näistä tsiksken tsikattika niin vanhan tieskin kautta panikin näistä aski tiki tsikskan avut tsikattikin sen naatti kisken tsikattikin kojas anime syökin vanhan tiki kautta panikin.
And it also includes information on how culture is shared and practices are transmitted between generations and the experiences around it.
Ja vanhemmaisesti syökin avut tsikattikin taskane syönnekin kaisi kaisi ruokaa kipetsi utana kipetsi aina skepanikin kekana kipetsi vitsi kun aina kekana niin sitten avut tsikattikin.
So for our Aboriginal and or Treaty Rights and Interests assessment process, what we are planning to undertake is develop an understanding of Aboriginal and Treaty Rights and Interests that are asserted within the project's study areas.
Ja vanhemman näistä viisikin opettakin tsekojas näistä tottakin kan hiittäskään näistä naskomettuen teki kaisi espanjakan ta pizza nämä apattisiven kaisi nämä tykisken tsekattiin teki.
So as First Nation proponents, it is the goal of Wemigway and Martin Falls First Nations to work with Indigenous communities to understand community-specific Aboriginal and or Treaty rights and interests within the project areas and how these rights may be potentially impacted by the project.
Ja kun mä näistä vanhemmin ei niin nimitse kun kaikki tatse kun meno tsekisken takia kun jos näistä tottakin kan hi että skane sivittekin kona sikivitsi kun se kun jos se näkottaa tekniikan teki omenoa sivinen.
And so through this shared understanding of rights, we will be better positioned to have discussions with communities about potential impacts to these rights.
Ja kun mä kävin spiikan opettamaan, mä muukan opettamaan keuhkokivan sielti which we spiikan opettamaan keuhko keetti ispane kun mä opettasin niin sieltä myös kaikki mä ketti henikään teki.
And so together, we want to work with communities to develop strategies to avoid, reduce, or mitigate negative impacts while enhancing positive effects that can support communities in exercising their rights.
Ja kun mä näistä yhdessä teetäkin jäi tuttakin kun jos sielti ei sinä ohuma ajatuskeven niin mä opettasin niin vitisi ajatukset tatsekan ei kakano kemeno kaikki mä kaikki nikään teki.
So I spoke earlier about the project study areas. These are what they look like. We have a map back there as well that shows Aboriginal and or Treaty Rights and Interests local and regional study areas.
Ja kun mä opettelemaan, että kai sinä kun ne mennä skiumas niin no. Ja kun mä näistä että kun kan tiuttaa näktiin kun opetsekaan niin että skan ei syynnestä naskomettuen te pegenähtääkö siihen teki.
So the local study area is in teal or light blue on the screen. And that local study area allows us to gather specific information that can be used to help design the project by avoiding or mitigating effects to sensitive features such as sacred areas.
Jokainen ei sikon opetsekaan niin pieniä kun ne kautsekoneke. Kun jos sikon opetsekaan näistä niin kaikki uutta taas kaikki makakin. Näistä niin kiitti se minun panik niin kantti tei tutsekaan kun jos siki ei tutsekaan.
So the regional study area, which is in light yellow on your screen, allows us to gather information at a larger scale.
Mutta niitä hyvinä, että hiskamek kai se kan opettaa hikan nimenen kausaa ainakin ja kun tein kun ja sivi kanavassa käytiin ne syönemäkä iskessä.
So this larger scale allows us to better understand potential indirect effects on value components that are specific to Indigenous communities.
Ja kun mä kiittää no kun mä juopassa käytiin niin kun ne kiittää myös kaikki mä kakenesta eikä kiimen opani eikä opassa käytiin kun ja sieltä ei hirveästi että skane sivi että skane suokaisi ei tatsi näistä kiittää
So these are shared with communities earlier in the process and were firmed up based on their feedback. I will be around where the map table is back there and would be happy to talk about our process.
Kiettiikä kun mä kanoo kun mä koen kanna koen mä kanna mä ei tiedä tästä no kun hikä kivetsi kivi check ja kun tänne mä kiittää että tänään titti hitchia pitche spiwen kanna vivetsi ja mä hade pumen wa checki kanoo tamik.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so where do we go next? Well, we take feedback that we've received through the process of talking about the preferred corridor alternative. Any feedback we get from tonight, and then we're gonna go forward, do any refinements if necessary, and we'll go forward with basically a memo to document the process involved in identifying the preferred corridor and take it to the working group for final approval, and then we'll go forward. Yeah, let's just.
Evan mä mitä kirjoittamaan. Kiitos tsekattik. Se mä monen kattik nämä käpitsi petsi kun hän oma kaikki petsi viittämään viik. Näissä tuutte ne kattik niin kiitos papit ne kattik mä maatsis kiitos esti tuutte ne kattik nämä kaikki viisuen päästä on
So with that, we're gonna open it up to any questions that you may have. So if people have questions, we have people that hopefully have answers.
Ja kun mä asun muina kanssa, mikä kuitenkin hemot, kekwana voi, kuitenkin muina, kakas taugutti, tatsikö ne kuin hän teki naskuusin tatsik.
If anyone has any questions? If you don't have any questions now, we can set up a table over here. If anyone wants to sit down with us and talk to us about, just sort of one-on-one or in a smaller group, they can do that over here. Otherwise, feel free to circulate through and look at the different displays. We've got people here that can answer any kind of questions you may have. Some of you are here for different reasons, so we respect that. But if you want to have a smaller discussion, we'll be over here to answer the questions you might have. So with that, we'll be right over here. Yes.
This being a live feed stream,
It is. It's a live stream. That's right.
so with this one, very few people sporadically present. Are you, when you do the open house like that, do you consider that part of the consultation?
So we also are recording this, right, Tony? And so we'll make this available on our website. So there's other ways to access this. In addition, leading up to this, we have done 2 radio shows on Wapiti Radio Network on the February 10th and 17th, talking about the same presentation, as well as 2 live streams on the 10th and 17th as well. So we try to make as much information available.
Kakuitsema on magi kuna oma puhu E magiging ishiga no bastime ishiga which maganan monomagito. Kotagian hige baby to shkevan they put in an began my egi mea wawate radio kametato gonna get the wagani shop ni south shop gonna get kishepism kia meet the venak e te patson of Segomeno. Ecomanista piece on it dog and not when a hand chicken dotta and the guy she can have cash can end the patson more.
To answer your question, yes. So there's two types of consultations. There's what they call statutory requirements, which is really the general public, and other stakeholders, and then there's the indigenous consultation requirements, which is more of a constitution obligations. So this one here is just general open house. We announce it for anybody that's both general public and indigenous interested parties that come here and ask questions associated with it. The consultation around specific First Nations, we've been requesting that of the 22 communities. Sorry, that's a lot. Almost every week, they want us to go to those communities to provide the same information.
My other question then is, with the preferred crossing or corridor, option 3, most likely, and even for your northern Portland, how many do you perceive the river crossing besides the major crossings which outside of Wapsta are you looking at?
Do you know, Ange, the preferred corridor, how many crossings in total there are?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. There's,
Open house. should
Yeah,
have been
I
part of
know.
that.
there's not a lot of major river crossings. They're all just small.
But in a sense, how much of the culverts, if you will you be using?
It's a good question. Can we get back to you on that? Because we'll ask our,
Sure.
Yeah, we could definitely do that, yeah.
because the way the government classifies crossings are different too. So there's small, there's streams and there's.
Well, yeah, if you look at this image right there,
Yeah.
that's the natural infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with the government's classification of this sort of an image is anti-colonial.
I agree with you.
Yeah, so if you look at that thing, with the government's classification category, indigenous knowledge will tell you otherwise.
Absolutely.
So that's really all I'm trying to get at here, and hence my presence. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's part of Michelle's work too, is to go out there with how we classify natural features, whether that's sites of cultural significance or land use utilization patterns, whatever it is. Like, I think your point's well taken, and how communities see the landscape, the waterscape, the skyscape, like that's part of the whole exercise. In the indigenous knowledge, but also what do we call that, heritage resources. There's different engagement that allows that kind of input.
And just one more with this image here. This is probably a north-south cycle. Would it be?
I don't know where that image came from. Is it, Tony, is that one of yours that you know with? No.
This
That's
is
one of
probably
ours. That
the
was one
view
of ours
from
that was
Parkinson.
taken. Sorry?
Oh,
That was one that was taken somewhere. I don't know.
It's probably from the eastern view. Look at it. From the typology, the mosaic, and then based on what I know. And if you have, that's what I mean by the anti-colonial, because there's going to be crossings there, east, west, right?
Yes.
And then crossings will run from south to north. So that's what I mean by that. The natural features of the landscape. So if you run into stuff like that, there's more than what you're telling, I guess. Yeah. I'm not trying to,
No, but you're right, there's a different view I mean, there's the engineer's view, right, of this. And then there's a more traditional view where there might be a different approach that might be taken, right?
thank you.
Hi, Michael. When we did the Five Nations Energy Project many years ago, we tracked all the crossings we did, and there was 3 major crossings, North and South Channel, the Albany and the Attawapskat River. We had 160 crossings, and probably 65% of them were 10-foot or less wide creeks. But it was that 40% that was all of the work to deal with the crossings of 15, 20, 30 feet, and then staying away or on the edge of exactly this picture, the softer, wetter areas. Where's the high ground? Where can you grow? And we did a lot of that with the knowledge of all the local people from the villages to say, here's where we normally go winter and summer. And that helped us dramatically in finding the beach ridges and high ground to stay on for access. So, his point's very good, but the issue will be you're going to come down to 15 or 20 major ones to deal with. The rest are going to be pretty straightforward.
But that's the value of having a corridor.
But that's
We're talking about
value
a
of
2
corridor
kilometer wide
Yep.
area within which that road
Yeah.
can sit, right? To give us the flexibility to adapt to what.
When we
we're
first
talking
started, Don, we started with about 10-kilometer corridor, and we got it down to where's the spot we want to work with in
Okay.
1.5 to 2 kilometers, and then got down to about 250 meters to put the transmission line on. But we also had the access trail and the winter road to kind of map them out differently because they had different purposes.
Yeah. So, we have the capability now because we're
So much.
finalizing a planning corridor to have that flexibility to make those adjustments, right? And that's why we want to reach out to solicit that kind of input.
For our translator.
Yeah, I can do this.
Okay.
En dan mag je zo wat te maken van een beetje knop te maken in pepite she kai tagoki CPA top sa tagatikin is bitago tihi way is Betatu met de mega kotos met de tagono open CPN is de CPN is de gai snibio tihi way is mijn kotos met de nyan metatu met de tihi she kan no wat sagati gani monatabu ki asho tanona ani tsiminoshi ki asho tanno ani himagan nemetana metana shutene gati ki mashkuch pogani ki spani pani chiki kwayaska apachistano ki chiasho tanno chiasho tatano meskano.
Easy memory.
That's why I write it down.
Any other questions?
Maybe just a point of, with his image, an elder would probably be able to tell you in terms of its, the point of view from the east to the west, and then the north and the south. Because of the, there's a lived experience out there, and so I'm thinking that patch over there. You might look at that. That's why I say, and I assume this is probably about east, from the point of the eastern part of the view, my viewpoint.
No, I understand. My grandfather used to visit us in North Bay, and when I was a boy, and he knew the way to my mom's place. until they clear cut it for the subdevelopments. I remember this very well. My mom was on the phone, and he goes, I said, "Who's that?" He goes, "Lucian." He goes, he's kind of lost. So really, well, because he used to read the trees to get to our place.
Yeah.
And she taught me that there's other ways to read the world besides the agriculture.
So what we'll do is we'll put together that inventory, and I'm sure we have it already, Ange, the number
We
of
do.
types of crossings for the preferred alternative. But we take your point, and I think, going forward, they have to be looked at individually, right? And that more detailed dive in terms of the, what's the best way to describe it? The shape, the morphology of the river, at that crossing point and things like that have to be looked at, right? And community members have to be able to be involved in that process, right, to refine those crossings. So, no, it's a great point.
Hani hemagagi obasagati kişi barnegano meskano kagigan obasagati opefegan hichigisken chagati mwese tanishna ogan miteke dagishi batama kan meskano and hishi pieces and nesta progression biogiteke payasagan obasagati chigisken chagati mwese now nesta chigiton ogan metishi chigishabastan on nesta body chigishe with barnegano meskano.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, like, as I said, we'll be over here and we can have smaller discussions if you like, and feel free to look at the boards and ask any of our project staff as well if you have any questions. Oh, sure, yeah, of course. Or I can even send you the slide. Oh, yeah, you left your email, right?
I did.
Okay, yeah, we'll send it. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's okay. We got your time. All right.